Alright. Hey guys, I just want to let you know this is my video on the progress I've made over time to get to where I am now. This here is all of my prototypes that I have made of metal. Now, that doesn't include all of my 3D printed prototypes throughout the past 2 years that I've been doing this. But this video will include everything. And when I mean everything, I mean everything. Everything. Okay. Hopefully this is centered right. I have no idea. Can't really see it. But to start it off from, I guess it'd be smart to start it off from the very beginning. I got into the community because I've always had an interest in balisongs, butterfly knives, I know they're the same thing, but that kind of stuff in general. But I never got into it until about, I don't know, maybe 18, 19 years old. For reference, I'm 21 right now. And I've probably spent about two years in this community trying to make and present, because I've been a 3D modeler since freshman year in high school. Except from there, I started out in AutoCAD doing 2D work in school. Sophomore year, and technically junior year, I got into Revit. But at the latter end of junior year, I started self-teaching myself Fusion, which is what I use now 90% of the time. I was never taught anything in Fusion. I'm self-taught entirely. Of course, like some YouTube videos to maybe figure out what a certain tool does or what something's used for, if something is possible. But I mean, I'm self-taught from the very beginning. Everything I've kind of learned. Now tolerances, machining, all that kind of stuff, I did a ton of research on, and I also kind of self-taught. There are some stuff with the tolerances and the specs required in a balisong that I was taught by actually quite a few in the community, and I can thank every single one of them, including Garrett, I Am Not a Real Boy on Instagram, Lucas from Squid Industries. I had some help from Machine Wise. I'm probably forgetting a few, and I'm extremely sorry if I remember anyone else that was a big help in helping me learn this stuff. I will mention you in the comments, or in the description actually. But the two biggest that helped me the most were definitely Garrett, as he's the only reason why I'm even as far as I am, and Lucas when I was getting started, especially with the machining side of things. As many of you know, actually, I'll cover that later because that's going to go out of order. I'm not the greatest flipper because I've only been in the community in general, all together for maybe 2 to 3 years at most. But I created ShatteredConcept with the idea of this blade design of what many of you might remember as my first ever version of Shattered. This Chunkalunka thing that at this point I'm giving it the name the Minecraft-a-song, because the real metal prototype is a square. I don't know how. So when I made this was the first, I guess I can't say the first. The first model I made was some really bad, I don't even think it had pins. It was just really, really bad. It never had a name. It was just something random I made. It was just a piece of crap. No, I don't even know where it is. I probably threw it out. My second one was essentially a glider. I don't actually remember what model I based it off of, but it was definitely a clone of some kind. It was some garbage ass clone that I made. But since then, I'm going to continue on from there because I don't know where those other two designs are, but from there was when I made this version of Shattered. That, depending on how long you've been following me, you might remember, you might not. I think I remember using a FlashForge Adventurer 3 for this. And I made the handles, as you can see, they're sandwich, but there is no spacer, as the spacer is combined with each side here. As not immersed as I was in the community, I was using Phillips head screws at whatever I can find, including pins that I got off Master. Same goes for washers. Inside the blade here, the reason why it's solid up here, hollow back here, is because I actually paused the print and inserted washers in the middle of the print so it can print over. So it is essentially weighted, and it's not the worst thing ever, but it is definitely got horrible tolerances. But I mean, what else do you expect? It's plastic as it is. And that's not to say all 3D printed plastic Balisongs are bad. It's just this one was, and it's not easy to make a 3D printed Balisong with crazy good tolerances, let alone if it can flip well. So yeah, you can consider this the first ever prototype of Shattered, which by now I've come a long way, and I would definitely say this is not great, but some might consider this actually good for a first prototype, I guess. But that's to each their own. So, Shattered version 1, I guess you could say, as a prototype. This was a little play on what I was doing. This was another Shattered handle. I guess, looking at it, this might have actually come before the handles you see here. Because at one point, apparently, I tried to make a pin out of the 3D print, and as you can see, that obviously didn't work out. And then this was supposed to be a logo that I was going to try to build into it, but decided to kind of just scratch that all together. Weights here at the end. So, this was definitely a Shattered handle. I just don't know. I'm pretty sure this had to have come first before these. So, that puts that aside. Here's a ton of iterations of the same handles. This is one where it's a channel, well, I don't even really know what you would call this, but it's solid, has a screw in the bottom for a weight, but it's one piece. So I made the same effects across all of these, but that's when I started kind of messing about with specs, tolerances, and all that stuff out of my 3D printer to create a sandwich version, which is what I have here. So I went through a lot of these. Some of these are different filaments. I think these are normal PLA. I think these ones are gray and different, because if I'm right, they might be, I'm trying to remember if I actually had the filament at this time or not, but these could very much be a high impact PLA, but I don't recall. And I don't mean hips. I mean, I'm talking, I can't remember its name, but it's like a PLA plus kind of. But I guess I never went forward with it. Actually, with only one being here, I might have broke it. I don't even know. Broke the other one. Just want to make sure that was in line. So then after that, as dumb as this is, I think one of the comments I remember on this is, it looks like something straight out of the McDonald's Happy Meal. But this was technically my second design. As you'd expect, it looks like ass. I mean, there's no way around it. This just looks bad. I'm not sure how much of this gets picked up in the camera, but yeah, this just wasn't good. It's unique, I guess I can give it that, but it just isn't great. I think I designed this one so it was supposed to actually fit on this Shattered version's kind of like template, I guess you could say. This one came way later down the line, but I might as well include it because I mean I put in the time to make it. As some of you might know, I made a Attack on Titan themed Balisong. This comes way down the line. This is probably more recent than anything, but I just wanted to include it because it's just a random piece that I have laying around incomplete, so I might as well get that out of the way. It is, I mean, I think this was also on a Flash Forge Adventurer 3, but, not much to say about this one. I never went forward with it doing anything, but I was making this more for myself than for the community. I just wanted to see if I can do it, and I was a big fan of Attack on Titan when I made this, so, yeah. Those aside, I'm not sure when I put this thing together. I don't even know what this is. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't even know if this is gonna be allowed on YouTube. This doesn't quite look right. But I made it. I don't know much more about it than that, honestly. I don't know what entirely was going through my head. I think I just wanted to make a plastic balisong that was well balanced without weights, but I mean, that was when I realized it didn't work. I also managed to make the blade too long. But yeah, this is the R-rated balisong. I don't know what this is. I guess from there, that was when I had my first ever prototype made of the what I'm calling the Minecraft-a-song now. But it's the version 1 of Shattered, which strangely actually has very good tolerances. The bushings were milled by the company. They weren't bought, and that could be a reason for it. But I mean, it's just not great. It has a weird issue with the handles closing in. I'm not quite sure what it was. It's just design-wise, it was very underwhelming. So that's when I decided to go back on it. But it's got some good weight. It had some, I think it was blade bias, so that's also why I went back on it. Nothing to brag about, but it was here. This was my first design come to life. Very kind of surreal to have one in my hands that I had on a computer, and that was the first time that kind of hit me. But yeah, so after this one just was not good. Simply, the blade was just too wide. It was just a little too bulky. That's when I decided to go back and try it again, which is where I ultimately came down to apparently these only 2 pieces, but I had way more shattered handle pieces. They probably all broke. That's when this one came to be, which, as you can see here, that blade is thinner. The handles are much thinner. They have a different contour. I got rid of this block at the top and just made it round, which, funny enough, was a complete accident. I deleted a section, one of the surfaces, and it made that shape, and I was like, huh, well, that actually looks better. So I kept with it. I think this one is God, I can't remember the name of it. It's a PLA Plus. I can't remember what it is, but I think that's what this one is. Hence why it's gray. But yeah, so here is a 3D printed version of the Shattered, I guess you could say V2. So not weighted. It's not meant to be weighted. It was just meant to see what it looks like visually. Some of you might remember when I first started posting about this one to bring up the hype of the Shattered prototype I had made. From there, a lot of people wanted to see a live blade, so I did design a live blade, which I've deleted since then, all the posts of everything. Some of you might remember it, might not. So you might be able to appreciate this. The only reason why I'm not going through with a live blade is because I just don't have, I don't want to be held liable for anything that might happen. I might one day do live blade versions of some of my Balisongs. I know Riptide has a live blade version as well, but I was not able to find the 3D print of it, if I even made one. And I don't know if I've ever showed online the look of it, but either way, I might consider live blades, but it won't be for a long while because I can't be held liable at the moment. But it's a possibility. So, but here's that, since I know it's very uncommon. Not many people see it, but that's the the Shattered live blade. Fits on this one and everything. I could replace it. So, yeah. Let's see, from here, I guess the next step would have been this prototype, which most of you definitely recognize, as this is really the reason I got as much attention as I did, was because of this prototype here, which, as you can see, is the real version of this. This never went further than it did because the company I was using to help make these were extremely expensive, overpriced to say the least, and just didn't have the tolerance requirements I needed, and it just wasn't worthwhile. This was on my mistake, the reason why the handles slap. I created it, which you might even notice already on how this is possible. This is a solid piece, but it's hidden Zen pins. This, I had to pull apart the handles and just kind of slot in a pin to assemble this. But you're going to question, how is milling even possible? I don't think it is. For what I understand, the company had to do a process, trying to remember what they called it. I think they called it FDM, but it's not like a 3D. I don't think they made like a 3D printer, but they used, they told me it was like FDM. But, either way, they told me it was some process. Can't remember what they call it though. SLE maybe? I'm not sure. Yeah, so that one's still kind of a mystery to me, but they were able to get it done, and it's a great piece to have, but it's just a lot of tap, can't be worked out. It's got quite a bit of play, but it's pretty well balanced. Nothing wrong with it. Beautiful piece. But yeah. So, of course, when I thought this was going to go well, I started making cases, which some of you might also remember. Let's see, I think this was the first one I made. This was meant to be the shattered case, which I designed to fit this one since it was what I had. But I think that was the issue, was I made it too thin, like too close, so it's a bit on the stiff side to get in and out. So I tried again and again, obviously, and ultimately I came down to getting, I started using this color, which was a cool gradient color, but this was super glued, as you can tell by this white, like kind of powdery finish, which obviously is why that one didn't go very far. This was another one I made. I think I also glued this one, but it had a lot of strange issues here that I wasn't too fond of. This one has a lot of super glue going on here. I mean, it's not gonna say anything more than that. I think this was the final one that actually turned out right, and I was still never able to figure out the glue situation, apparently. But this would be able to slide in here, and this was the idea on how you would receive your shattered. You would get it in this case, and you would get your Balisong out like that. So, and that's how that went. But because Shattered didn't go much further than that for a while, because I started focusing on the CNC side, which most of you would remember as well. When I had a TIG micro mill, CNC micro mills, I was creating tool paths for myself, attempting to create Shattered myself to make it way more cost efficient, since they were trying to charge me an arm and a leg for this, where this had this made in bulk. I think I would have to sell it to retail for about 200 something, which I was not fond of doing. And at the same time, even selling for 200, I didn't make almost any profit at all, which, not even doing it at a greed, but I wouldn't be able to do this full time, and I wouldn't be able to get pieces out at any kind of urgency, because I would have to still work a full-time job on top of this. So it's not even about simply wanting profit. There was no way to make that work. So I started trying to make them myself. Many of you know that took forever, and after that kind of started to fail and backfire, that's kind of when I took a break and kind of disappeared. Deleted all my stuff for about 6-8 months, maybe almost a year, I don't really know. But this was as far as my own machining was going, with a small little micro mill I had in my garage. And it was going very well, but the issue is with the machine, it was not, it wasn't a good industry standard machine. The bed that it had did not fit anything industry standard, so I couldn't find products online to allow me to use, like a vise as an example. Just in this situation, I needed to cut the channel. There was no way for me to do that with just buying a vise. I would have to create my own jig. Because of this machine's lack of equipment that I can use to make it work, I couldn't use a vise to be able to create the jig to fit this, even if I wanted to. And it became, let's just say, it became a huge rabbit hole of reasons why that machine was just not going to work for me. Later on, a company named Samurai made a machine also small, but way more industry standard. But by then it was too late. I wasn't able to go back down that path. I put my money into it, into the CNC machining, and it wouldn't work. I do intend one day, and I do want to go back to actually machining and making my own stuff here. But for now, that's got to be pushed on the side because I've been prolonging this process for way too long. Anyway, next would be Riptide, that you all know about. So most of these I'm going to say are just, honestly, they're just kind of about. It's safe to say that these ones were probably my first versions. So this one. These were probably my first versions of Riptide because you could tell because I didn't learn from my mistake with Shattered. I still had, the only difference I had is I had the pins go all the way through, and that was all that I learned. But this, the channel being all the way through but one piece, just isn't efficient for machining. It's risky. I was concerned about this here. This was way too open, which even on plastic is bad, but you consider it on aluminum, one drop, and that's going to become an angle. Now, the original had this little, that's weird, warp down there. Yeah, it has this little, line that goes down the side for grip, this little milling line. So, but as you can see, the cutouts are pretty large. They're just a little risky on that side. Not much to say about these. I mean, I messed with them, then I was like, hey, you know what, maybe I should change it up. This isn't going to work. So that's when I started to make a sandwich version. I changed the cutouts here to make them a little bit less risky when dropping. Made them sandwich. I had spacers. I intended to have at this time, I was still trying to force my mill to work. So I was going to try to have the actual pieces laser cut here locally by someone. And then I was going to take it back and run it through my machine for all the finishing operations. Send it out to get anodized, and then 3D print the spacers, because I intended it to be balanced by using a plastic spacer and the screw. Ultimately, and that's how I kind of got to this point with this one. 3D printed spacer, this. The problem with it was, that's when I learned my machine just couldn't even do that either. It was not able to make these cuts accurately. So, even though this design is extremely flawed, it doesn't have the worst of tolerances, but it's very much a rough finish. And I don't know what the guy who laser cut it did, but this cut here, you can probably see it a little bit. It's thick up here and it gets thin. I think here as well, it gets thin, thick, and it's like, this was not how I designed it at all. To this day, I don't know what he did. I really cannot figure it out, but it's just not accurate, and that was also something. Plus, this sticks out the back, the spine of the blade. So I went back to the drawing board. I made some more blade 3D prints that I kind of made for the rest of the prints. This was my more recent one, where I made it channel all the way through. This material is actually interesting. It changes color in the sunlight. It's actually starting to now, just through my window. But I don't think it's going to get all the way through because I'm not outside. But this is the closest thing to what I have for my finished ripped prototype, which is this. Which turned out very well, but there was a few issues. This is where I started getting help from Garrett to help me learn some of the aspects of, I guess you could say, the engineering side to these Balisongs. Ultimately, the issue came down to a few things that I failed to tell them to do in the finishing operations, including surface grounding the blade so it wasn't flat, which causes these handles to close in. I can't close the handles down all the way. When I tried to press the pins myself, they made the holes too small, so when I tried to press them in, I had to lay into the pins to press them in, which I used the 3D printed spacer, which would have been good if they made the holes the right size. They didn't, so ultimately it crushed the 3D printed spacer I made to stop it from closing in, and it ultimately, they crushed in, so now the handles are just messed up. You can probably see it here. I messed up the ridge here, just trying to kind of pull them apart again, like pry them apart. But that's the Rift prototype. Riptide, jeez. So, after all these here, I went on ahead and as some of you probably remember, I made 3 designs back to back. I mean, we're talking 1 design per day that honestly, being that I thought of it, sketched it, designed it in 1 day, I would say is very good. I know not everyone is fond of these, but, you know, to me it's more of an accomplishment of what I can do in 3 days. This one is called Kintsugi. I know, very different name. But this was my first time trying a more flat design, because as you've probably noticed throughout the rest of my designs in the past, they kind of start out thick or thin and they get thicker towards the bottom. Shattered was somewhat that way, but not too bad. It was still pretty level. Riptide was the first one where I probably went too far with it and I made it way too bulky at the base. So I've stepped away from that. So it's a very flat design. It's square, it's rounded. It's got nice jimping, this little countersink here, which I think gives a good effect to it. And this was meant to be aluminum. The blade had people kind of iffy because it had a bottle opener. And just something about the appearance gives off a very like Amazon Balisong look, which I can understand, it kind of does. But it was still, to me, I kind of like the design. It's unique. This one's called Yanmai, which I'm going to show you this version of it because I took this one apart for this. So it's got a I can't remember the name of this blade all of a sudden. A kukri, I think. I don't know how to pronounce it. Style blade. This one you can tell is kind of jacked up. I was trying to actually make it a plastic balisong, so I was pressing in stainless steel balls down here, and I think stainless steel weights down here, and I think a stainless steel and 2 tungsten balls here to try to make it balanced and flip. It didn't really work. The balls fell out, as you can see here, but anyway. Different unique style. This one, which is a little hard to tell on this here, it's not quite round, but it's got like kind of a triangular triangular prism type of shape to it, which you might be able to see. It might be hard to tell, but either way, I thought it was a nice design that I was able to make. Here's some more handles of that one when I was trying to test things out with the different weights. The last one I made, it was Rift, which, mind the print, I had really bad purple filament, and that was all I had for this, so it is very rough. But this was the Rift prototype, and it looked good, don't get me wrong, nothing was too wrong with it. I had made some changes from this to the final version, including the texturing, as you would know, on top. I mean, this version of it, there was nothing really to brag about. It just looked good. Nothing really more to say than that. But yeah, so that was the Rift prototype. Of course, all my designs up to this one were all supposed to be stainless steel and aluminum. This Rift one was my first ever titanium design I've ever made. So this was very tricky for me to try to figure out the difference in the amount of material I need to get rid of just to make this thing balanced and not weigh half a ton. Which leads me to, actually, before I show you that, this was the case I had made for Riptide, if it ever went out. Which, I don't know if that shows, but this just slides in very snug. It would have been done just like that. But that leads me to my most recent design, which I have now got to the point where I'm incredibly close to making my first production balisong. As you can tell, the handle gap went horribly wrong. I don't quite know what happened. but that's an easy fix. I just need to fix these divots here. The handle gap on the open side is not, I wouldn't say it's personally bad, but it probably could be tweaked a little bit smaller, depending on preference, which I will fix. It does have one other issue, which I am sending it to Garrett to have diagnosed, because both him and myself are clueless as to why this is happening. I won't go into detail, but yeah, it's just a pain. But as you can see, in this version, I have texturing all along the surface, which I consider to be the perfect amount of texture, where it's not rough on your fingers at all, but you can feel it clearly all day long. It's got a nice round shape here. It's a little sharper on the edges than I would have liked, but the round surface kind of makes up for that. You got the speed channels, this groove on the back to allow for extra grip. You have this nice shape. You have tip weight, which I know is not too common, but people do like. So, and I've gotten to the point where my tolerances are way better, even if I can't tighten down the screws all the way like I would like to. But the anodizing on this is absolutely beautiful, and this is definitely my best design as of now. I'm going to follow up this video, so there will be a cut, but I'm going to follow up this video with some Q&A questions that I was asking my those who support me on Instagram. So I will come back when I have some questions to answer on here. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, so one of the questions I got was, what is the most difficult part in the process of making a battle song? So what I'm going to say is this. If you mean machining and milling them yourself, hand making them, anything, easily the most difficult part isn't the appearance. It isn't the finish. It's definitely trying to get the tolerances correct. Now, once you have a machine dialed in, it's probably much easier to be able to get those tolerances correct. Because once it's done right, it should be repeatable, theoretically. Then from there, it's probably getting a good finishing process done on the Balisongs that are consistent. But in the design process, which I'm assuming is what they're referring to, as I'm more of a designer than I am a maker myself at this point. When designing a Balisong, it's still designing the tolerances. I would still definitely say is probably one of the more tedious parts, but I wouldn't say it's difficult. Only because once you know the numbers you need to achieve, you can make those numbers happen and then work around those numbers. So like the space between the washers and the channel and the handles, the bushing holes, all that kind of stuff. But those tolerances can be a little difficult to understand. But realistically, I would say that the most difficult part, which isn't super difficult with a program like Fusion, is modeling these designs with a good balance. Because realistically, the only reason why this one has as many features as it does, and even the handles are kind of as thin as they are compared to normal Balisongs, is simply the fact that because it's titanium, I was not expecting such a big difference in weight. So I had to reduce a ton of weight by cutting away material all over the place, which that includes jimping here, the speed channels here, this ridge on the back, and honestly something that's hard to tell, but even how thin the actual channel wall is itself. All of that made a factor in how balanced this piece will be, where the handles won't be too heavy and the blade will be too light, all that kind of stuff. So that is probably the more difficult part when designing, if it's not the actual tolerances. The second question I got was what strategies I use to design my Balisongs. I think that's another very good question. Honestly, when it comes to Balisongs, they all function the same for the most part. You got with different weights, but in the end, all in all, it's 2 sticks of titanium or aluminum, 1 stick of steel typically, unless you have the all aluminum Balisong like Squid Industries has made, or now the all steel one from the Bali, which are incredible. Either way, in the end, it's 2 sticks with a blade at the end on a bushing system or bearing system or something of the sorts. In the end, it's on a pivot. So realistically, it all comes down to, in your head or on paper preferably, draw out a 2D sketch of what you want this to look like. You can base it off something, or if you're good at drawing abstract stuff and just shapes, you can just draw out shapes. Create the sketch just so you don't lose it, and envision what you want it to look like in your head. When you get into your model space, start out by creating a block with a hole in the right place. And what I would personally do, which is what I do, I've created a template, a 2D sketch template that I copy and paste to all of my new designs every time I make one, which gives me the ideal shape of one. So it should be the ideal length, it should be the ideal width of everything, and all I do is keep my design sketch within that template. And that includes the where the pivot holes are. The pinholes I used to include, but I got rid of when I realized that, of course, with more different and complex designs, that pin had to move, so there was no point. But overall, it's just a matter of get a design in your head, sketch it. If you can create a template that you can just copy and paste all over the place, do that. If not, create your rough shape. Your handle length, your blade length, and just have it in. Create the rough shape and then just kind of mold it to the shape you want. And use a lot of mirroring and duplicating, as that will help you get a faster workflow while also achieving a symmetrical appearance, as well as the most possible well-balanced look you can get. Because if you're going to try to do both of these and you're just going to try to cut through, you might make a mistake that you may not realize. If you were to cut this in half this way, model one half of it and just simply mirror it on a face and combine it, it's now perfectly symmetrical. Then you just mirror it along an axis to create a double. Then you have 2 handles identical without having to make 2 of them, which I'm sure a lot of people know, but just throwing that out there for those who don't. And then other than that, create your blade. If you use Fusion, which is what I would highly recommend, add the materials. Make sure that your material in the program is set to steel or whatever material you're going to use for your blade. And in this case, titanium or whatever material you use on the handles. You should be able to use a center of mass under the, I can't remember what they call it, if it's simulation, I think, tab. Either way, you'll find it. It's going to be the circle in with 2 black, it's almost like 2 black and white checker boxes going across it. This center of mass will allow you that when you choose your handles, so if you click your handles and your blade, it'll show you the center of mass of where it should be. Like, somewhere around here. That's very rough. I wouldn't actually follow that, but you want it to be balanced. I would, if possible, model your hardware. It's unbelievable how much the hardware can make a difference in your balance point. Some of these designs were, I would consider perfectly balanced to where I wanted it. Then I include the hardware, including the washers, the bushing, the pivot barrel and screw, and all of a sudden, oh wait, now it's ever so slightly blade bias. So I would do whatever you can to make it as physically accurate to what you would have made as possible, and with the materials, the shape, everything. When it comes to something so small like the screws, they don't need to be they don't have to be spot on where you have the T10 star and everything. You don't have to go that far, but you will want the materials in the rough shape, as this will help you guide your dimensions the best you possibly can. This also determines weight. How do you determine weight and all that stuff? But strategies, easiest thing to do, as I kind of said, to sum it up, have a design in your head, sketch it out. If you have a template, use that to help base your design off of. But either way, start making the 2D sketch, making it, and then extruding it to 3D, and then working off of that. In that 3D sketch, or 3D model itself, you should be able to you should be able to just kind of work around and add and take away features until you get the desired appearance you want. It won't be 100% to your sketch, but it'll be, you just work the way you want it. Then once you have the design the way you want it in appearance, choose your center of mass. I wouldn't do it the order I have done, which is a mistake. Model your hardware and include that with your first original look at your center of mass, because this will allow you to make the small adjustments, like maybe shrink this cutout, make more jimping, you know, stuff like that, and just kind of tweak the different faces using the Fusion timeline as much as you can to just alter these shapes rather than remodel and cut, because this can make it a pain to go back and work on if you ever have to. And then this way, by the end of it, as long as you have your tolerances set right, your look right, your balance right, it should theoretically be a complete design. The only thing you've got to do would have to get it made or make it yourself, which that's a whole different subject.